The energy readings are fluctuating near the main access port.
Confirmed. The internal schematic shows a complete power failure. Adjust the scanner array.
He just wanted to fix the ship. That was all. That was the entire intention. A broken ship, a mechanic who knew how to fix things, and 8 hours of work that nobody asked him to do, and nobody expected him to finish. What came after was not something any of them planned for. His name was Dex Oren. He was 31 years old, a field mechanic with the Coalition Vessel Recovery Division, which was exactly what it sounded like, a team of people who went to ships that had broken down in places where breakdown was inconvenient and fixed them enough to get them home. It was unglamorous work. It paid adequately. It suited Dex in the specific way that work suits people who are genuinely good at something and find genuine satisfaction in doing it well. He had been with the Recovery Division for 7 years. In those 7 years, he had worked on 340 vessels across 23 species, in conditions that ranged from routine to conditions that his supervisor described, in the quarterly safety briefings, as situations where you use your best judgment and hope the judgment is good. He had never lost a vessel he was assigned to recover. He had come close twice. Both times, he had found the solution after everyone else in the team had moved on to contingency planning. He had a reputation in the division, not a loud one. The quiet kind that builds when people who work with you stop being surprised by what you can do. The Karath warship KSV Undying was not a Recovery Division assignment. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to know where this story is reaching tonight. And subscribe to HFY Universe if you haven't yet. Because where this story goes is not where anyone expected. Let's keep going. The KSV Undying had been sitting in a neutral docking bay at Crossroads Station for 11 days when Dex walked past it for the 4th time that week. He was not supposed to be involved. The Karath were a mid-reach species with their own engineering core and their own protocols, and a documented preference for handling their own technical problems without outside assistance, which was a preference the Coalition respected, because the Karath also had documented preferences about what happened when their preferences were not respected. The warship had suffered a cascade failure in its primary drive system 3 weeks earlier during a training exercise. The Karath engineering team had been working on it since arrival. In 11 days, they had made no visible progress. The ship sat in the neutral bay, dark except for emergency lighting, while a team of 12 Karath engineers ran diagnostics that were producing results that apparently none of them could interpret. Dex knew this because he had talked to the docking bay technician who was managing the bay, who had talked to the Karath logistics officer who handled supply requests, who had mentioned, in the offhand way that people mention things when they are not sure what to do with them, that the engineering team had run the same diagnostic 14 times and gotten different results each time. Different results from the same diagnostic meant one of two things. Either the diagnostic equipment was faulty, or the fault being diagnosed was affecting the diagnostic. Both were bad. One of them was considerably more interesting to a mechanic. He had thought about it for 2 days before he did anything. What he did on the morning of day 13 was submit a formal request through the Coalition Karath Liaison Office to be permitted to observe the engineering team's work. Not to assist observation only. He had written the request carefully, specifically, without any implication that the Karath team required assistance or that he had anything to offer beyond curiosity. He had been rejected twice before in his career for being too direct about capability and had learned how to frame requests since then. The request was approved in 4 hours. He spent the first day watching. The Karath engineering team were competent. He established that quickly and without reservation. They moved through the diagnostic procedures with the precision of people who had been trained well and trained long, and their documentation of the results was thorough and detailed and organized, in a way that told him they were taking the problem seriously. The problem was that they were looking in the wrong place. He knew this by the end of the first hour. Not because they were wrong to look where they were looking, the diagnostic results pointed there, clearly and consistently. But because the diagnostic results were wrong, he could see it in the pattern of the failures, in the specific sequence of what was failing and what was not, in the way the cascade had started and the order in which systems had gone down. The cascade had not started in the primary drive. It had started somewhere else, and the primary drive had failed because of what started somewhere else in. and the diagnostics were pointing at the primary drive because that was where the most visible damage was, and nobody had yet looked at what the damage was a consequence of, rather than a cause. He recognized this pattern. Not from Karath ships, specifically, he had never worked on a Karath vessel. From 7 years of recovery work across 23 species, where the same fundamental failure logic appeared regardless of whose engineering had built the system. Catastrophic failures almost never started where they ended. The most visible damage was downstream. The origin was always quieter, smaller, less obvious, and in a location that the standard diagnostic did not include because the standard diagnostic was written for standard failures. This was not a standard failure. He had known that from the first description. Standard failures did not produce inconsistent diagnostic results. Inconsistent results were interesting. Interesting meant the fault was telling you something the diagnostic was not designed to hear. He sat against the wall of the bay and watched the engineering team run their 15th diagnostic, and said nothing. He had not been invited to speak. He was there to observe. And there was a specific kind of problem in telling a team of 12 that they were looking in the wrong place when you had been there for 1 day, and they had been there for 13. He spent the rest of the first day mapping the ship in his head. Not its systems specifically. He did not have access to the Karath technical documentation, which was classified, and he had not asked for it. But the physical layout, the positions of the systems he could see, the relationships between them, the logic of how a ship this size would have been designed to distribute its power, and what that meant for what happened when something failed. He went back to his quarters that night and drew diagrams on the back of maintenance reports. Because it was what he did when he was working through something, and he had run out of clean paper. By the 3rd hour of the 2nd day, he was certain. The Karath engineering team lead was named Vor. She was tall even by Karath standards, with the specific bearing of someone who had been in command long enough. That authority was not something she performed anymore, it was just how she stood. She had acknowledged Dex's presence on the first day, with a look that communicated clearly that he was permitted to be there and nothing more. He approached her at the end of the 2nd day. "I would like to make an observation," he said. He said it in the specific phrasing he had learned, worked better than asking a question or offering a solution. An observation was something that could be received without requiring a response, which gave the person receiving it more room. She looked at him. "The diagnostic results have been inconsistent," he said. "Different outputs from the same input. That pattern usually means one of two things. The diagnostic equipment is affected by what it is diagnosing, which means the fault is interfering with the measurement. Or the fault itself is intermittent in a way that changes what the diagnostic captures. Each time it runs." He said nothing. He continued. "If it is the second," he said, "then the fault is not in a system. It is in a connection between systems. Something that activates differently depending on what else is running at the same time. That is why the primary drive shows the most damage. It is the system that draws the most power, and was therefore most affected when the connection failed. But the drive is not where the fault started." He stopped there. He did not say where he thought the fault had started. He had said enough to make the observation. What she did with it was her decision. Vor looked at him for a long time. She looked at the diagnostic display beside her. She looked back at him. "Where?" she said. He told her. It took him 6 hours, not because the repair was complicated once you knew where to look. The actual fault was a stress fracture in a coupling assembly that connected 2 power distribution nodes that no one had thought to check because no diagnostic pathway ran through both of them simultaneously. A fracture so small it was nearly invisible, in a location that the standard inspection protocol for this class of vessel did not include because the designers had calculated the coupling as a redundant system that could not fail in isolation. The designers had been wrong. Not by much. The calculation was sound under normal operating conditions, but the training exercise had put the ship through a load sequence that the designers had not included in their parameters. Because it was a training variation that had been developed after the ship class was built, the fracture had been there for some time, possibly years, growing slowly, imperceptibly, until the exercise had put enough stress on it to cause a failure that cascaded through 4 connected systems and ultimately took down the primary drive. He found it, confirmed it, fixed it, and tested the fix in 6 hours. The engineering team watched. Some of them watched the work. Some of them watched him in the specific way. People watch someone do something they have been trying to do for 13 days. When the primary drive came back online, the engineering bay was quiet. Vor stood at the drive interface and ran the system check herself. It came back clean. She ran it again, clean again. She looked at Dex. How, she said. He explained the coupling assembly, the stress fracture, the load sequence, the cascade. He explained it clearly and completely, without making it more than it was a mechanical failure, with a mechanical solution, that had been missed because the diagnostic pathway did not include the connection between the two nodes. Vor listened. She asked 2 questions. He answered them. Then she said something in Karath that his translator rendered as, "You saw what we did not see. I saw it from a different angle," he said. "Your team documented everything correctly." The documentation showed me where to look. She looked at him for a moment. "That is a generous framing," she said. "It is an accurate one," he said. "I had 13 days of their work to learn from. That matters." He filed his observation report with the Coalition Karath Liaison Office. The following morning, a standard document, factual, describing what he had observed and what had been done. He included the technical details of the coupling assembly fault, in case they were useful for the Karath engineering review. He noted that the Karath team's documentation had been thorough and professional. He submitted it and went back to his regular recovery division work. He did not think about it much after that. A ship was fixed. A fault was documented. He had done what he went there to do. What happened over the following weeks was something he was not watching for and would not have predicted. The report moved through the Coalition Karath liaison system in the standard way. What was not standard was where it went after that. The Karath Engineering Corps reviewed it. Then the Karath Technical Division reviewed it. Then something in the review triggered a flag that Dex was not aware of and would not learn about for another 3 weeks. The flag was this. The coupling assembly fault that Dex had identified was not unique to the KSV Undying. It was a design characteristic of the entire vessel class. 47 Karath warships, all of them, carried the same potential fault in the same location, and none of them had been inspected for it because it was not in the inspection protocol. And it was not in the inspection protocol because the designers had calculated it as safe. Dex had fixed 1 ship. His report had, incidentally, identified a fleet-wide vulnerability. The Karath Technical Division's review of this finding produced a document that went to the Karath command structure. The command structure's response produced a meeting. The meeting produced a second meeting. The second meeting produced a question that nobody in the room had an answer to. How had a coalition field mechanic, in 2 days of observation with no access to classified technical documentation, identified a fault that 12 Karath engineers with full documentation access had missed for 13 days? This question was uncomfortable for several reasons. The most obvious was that it implied the Karath Engineering Corps had missed something a coalition mechanic had found. That was documented fact and could not be disputed. The second reason was less obvious but, in the estimation of several people in those meetings, more significant. The coupling assembly fault was not listed in any coalition technical database. It was not documented anywhere outside Karath internal records. It was a characteristic of a vessel class that the Karath had not shared design specifications for. Because military vessel design specifications were not shared with coalition partners, Dex had not had access to those specifications. He had not had access to any documentation about the vessel class at all. He had looked at a ship he had never seen before, from a species whose technical standards he had no formal training in, and identified a fleet-wide design vulnerability from 2 days of watching a team-run diagnostic. The question of how was the uncomfortable one. The implication of how was what produced the third meeting. The question went to the Coalition Intelligence Division. The Coalition Intelligence Division opened a file. The file's classification was standard at first. Then someone read the technical details of what Dex had done and upgraded the classification. Then someone else read it and upgraded it again. 3 weeks after he filed his observation report, Dex received a notification that his coalition clearance level was under review. He assumed it was a routine update. He signed the acknowledgement and went back to work. 2 days later, a different notification arrived. This one was not routine. It informed him that his name had been added to a coalition security watch list at the request of 3 separate coalition member species. The reason listed was, Undocumented analytical capability presenting potential strategic concern. He read the notification twice, then he read it a third time. He was a mechanic. He had fixed a ship. And somewhere in the machinery of galactic politics, the act of seeing a fracture in a coupling assembly had been processed, reviewed, escalated, and classified as a threat. He sat with that for a long time. Then he called his supervisor, because the recovery division had a protocol for when personnel received security notifications. And following protocol was what you did. His supervisor read the notification. Read it again. Looked at Dex. What fixed a ship? He said. I fixed a notification. At the classification level. At the list of species who had requested the watch listing. Just the ship, she said. And filed an accurate report, he said. She was quiet for a moment. The report, she said. The coupling assembly. Fleet-wide, he said. 47 vessels. She set the notification down, picked it up again. You identified a fleet-wide vulnerability in a foreign military vessel class, she said slowly. From 2 days of observation, with no access to their technical documentation. The documentation they had was thorough, he said. I just read the pattern differently. She looked at him for a very long time. Then she said in the tone of someone who has just understood something and is not sure how to file it. Dex, the galaxy thinks you are a threat. He thought about this. The ship was fixed. The fleet vulnerability was documented. The coupling assembly fractures would be inspected and repaired in 47 vessels that might otherwise have failed in the field under the wrong load conditions. The galaxy is wrong, he said. But I understand why it thinks so. His supervisor did not look reassured. He had not expected her to be. He went back to work. There was a recovery assignment waiting a mid-reach freighter with a navigation system failure, 2 days out from Crossroads. Straightforward, he had done it before. He packed his kit, signed out the equipment, started reading the freighter's pre-failure diagnostic logs on the transport over, the way he always did. The navigation failure had produced inconsistent diagnostic results. 3 runs, 3 different outputs. He had seen that pattern before recently, in fact, and he noted it in his working file and began mapping what it might mean. Somewhere in the Coalition security architecture, a file with his name on it was being reviewed by people he had never met, in rooms he would never enter, making assessments about what it meant that a mechanic had looked at a broken ship and seen something nobody else had seen. He was not thinking about that. He was thinking about the navigation system. There was a pattern in the inconsistent results that reminded him of something he had read once, in a recovery division technical archive from 8 years before he joined, about a class of failure that manifested differently depending on which systems were active when the diagnostic ran. He had not thought about that archived report in years. He pulled it up now, cross-referenced it against the freighter's diagnostic outputs, and found the correlation he had half remembered. The freighter's navigation failure was not in the navigation system. He started writing his pre-arrival notes. The transport had another hour and 40 minutes before docking. He would have the fault location identified before he arrived, which would save time, which meant the freighter would be recovered faster, which meant the crew had a shorter wait in a situation that was almost certainly stressful for them. That was the job. That was what he had come to do. The security watch list notification was somewhere in his messages, filed and acknowledged, and not something he was currently thinking about. There would be meetings. There would be questions. There would be people trying to understand how he had done what he had done, and he would explain it as clearly as he always explained things, and the explanation would probably not satisfy them, because the explanation was simply that he looked at patterns and patterns told him things. He had been doing that since he was 7 years old, taking apart machines on the outer settlement, where he grew up to understand why they worked, and putting them back together to make them work better. His family had found it useful. His teachers had found it remarkable. His employers had found it valuable. The galaxy apparently had found it threatening. He looked at the navigation diagnostic logs and found what he was looking for, and made a note and moved to the next section of the pre-arrival analysis. The freighter's